Immortal Rogue is real. I was jealous of the Immortal Barbs and Sorks running around, so I made this Rogue build the day before the new Endgame in Diablo 4 came out. With Selig, when monsters hit us, we lose energy instead of life, and we generate energy from dodging. We got like 50% dodge, so it's a lot. And every 100 energy spent releases a cluster of grenades that stun the enemies. And for each enemy stunned, we generate an additional 4 energy from our Umbral ring. This allows us to stand still with a lot of enemies hitting us and we're not dying. But as it turns out, the Abattoir of Zir is way less about being tanky and way more about dealing damage. So using Selig wasn't really an option. I also had this dream of running this Rain of Arrows build. I could even solo 4-man tier 100 Nightmare dungeons with it. But I caved in to using the biggest bug on the Rogue this season. Turns out 22 combo points is pretty good. So I scratched those first 2 builds and spent my first few days of the AOZ pushing with this Frozen Pen Shot build. With 900% lucky hit chance and using Frostburn, we freeze everything. And against frozen enemies, we're dealing triple damage or more because of 6 ranks of Frigid Finesse, Noxious Ice, Dominance, the Seasonal Power, and of course the Control Glyph. This is great, but the weakness of this build is that it makes elites unstoppable really fast, which makes our DPS drop a lot at higher tiers. Plus, this build also requires you to swap out your items and skills during the Bloodseeker fight, since Pen Shot is kind of useless when it comes to single target compared to Rapid Fire. So we split up the Bloodseekers using Concealment and fight them one by one. With this build, I managed to beat tier 14 before the new patch came out that reduced all monsters' damage dealt by 20%. Let's go! Now I'm tied with the #1 guy. The following day, I decided to try out a completely different build. This time a real weird one, using the Forgotten Pants Eyes in the Dark, which makes the ultimate death trap continuously trigger itself until something dies. My theory was that since nothing really dies in the AOZ, I can place multiple death traps at once using Flickerstep and have them all go ham on a bunch of elites. Plus, because we're evading through everything, we can benefit from Flurry Stun once you've evaded through an enemy. Funnily enough, this build actually works pretty well. It's a unique playstyle and doesn't follow the mainstream path of using Tybalt's Will, and it really doesn't need Shaco either. I think this build has potential to come back in future seasons. I beat a tier 12 with this build, but after that, the DPS just wasn't there. And another problem with this build is that it requires me to use the magic resist elixir to hit the 70% cap. The final build I want to showcase is the one I pushed the furthest with. It's similar to the previous one in that it uses Death Trap and Flickerstep, but this time we're going back to using Tybalt's Will to maximize our DPS with Twisting Blades. My theory here was the same. Create massive pulls with Death Trap and utilize the insane AoE poison damage from Twisting Blades. And since we're using an ultimate very consistently, I decided to use the No Witness Legendary node for about a 17% multiplicative bonus damage. This build honestly worked great. Very consistent, and my favorite part of all, it involves no gear or skill swapping whatsoever. And I could fight all 3 Bloodseekers at once. So this build has a special place in my heart just for that fact. It's less utilizing exploits and Blizzard's mistake of letting people swap and change up their builds once they're already in the AOZ dungeon. My next video will be my feedback on this new endgame activity. I think it can be improved a lot. Oh, and I put links to all of these 5 builds in the description.